What's going on, everybody? Coach Caleb Disney, CSCS here on behalf of Red Dot Fitness. We're going to lay down some science on how muscle growth works. So, most people understand that to build muscle, we need to produce force in the form of lifting weights. And there is some threshold that we need to cross that will stimulate growth. Now, what that threshold is exactly, I don't know if everybody fully understands. How many of us see people in commercial gyms who look the same year in, year out, and they look like they work hard, they take it seriously, but they don't go through any actual changes? So right off the bat, I want to define what will make muscle grow. And what that is training to a point of failure or just shy of failure. So we define failure as training until you are physically unable to complete another repetition with good form. So it's a lot easier to take yourself to true failure on, say, a machine where your body is locked in place and there's no fear of hurting yourself by dropping the weight, than it is for like a free weight exercise like a barbell back squat or a barbell bench press, where you need to have somebody spotting you to be able to safely get all the way to failure. But we can conclusively say that productive muscle growth will happen somewhere around 3 or even 4 reps shy of true failure. So that's the minimum threshold that we need to be reaching. So next, I want to define what intensity is, because we also see that phrase thrown around a lot in the fitness space. Intensity is not how hard you work or how out of breath you get or how sore you get. For our purposes, we're going to define intensity as proximity to failure. So how many more reps could you have done if you had to before failing? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard would you say you worked? So if we use that would be called the RPE, rate of perceived exertion scale. And I said on a scale of 1 to 10, with the set I just did, I would rate it a 9. I did almost all that I could, but I had maybe 1 or 2 left in the tank. That's a pretty productive set. Or in terms of the reps in reserve scale, RIR, if I did a set and say, if I had a gun to my head, I probably could have done 2 more reps. That would be called an RIR of 2. And that would also fall under the category of enough intensity to stimulate some muscle growth. So we understand now that our sets in the gym need to be productive enough to actually induce growth. We can't just go and do reps until it starts to burn and then call it a day. The next thing we need to understand is that just like anything else in the body, the stimulus that we apply will need to increase over time to get the same rate of gains. And so a nice example that I like to talk about is, say, caffeine. If you've never had caffeine in your life before, a cup of coffee, which is maybe about 80 milligrams of caffeine, will get you wired. You will feel it. But if you drink a cup of coffee every day for 2 weeks, it's probably not going to do much for you anymore. So now you might need, say, 2 cups of coffee, about 160 milligrams, to get the same effect. Training works the same way in your body. And so we're going to take a look at what is called the fitness to fatigue model. And just looking right here, we see each of these dots is a training session. And you notice this is the distance. So this is how much we grow in between training sessions. And as time goes on and we accumulate more training sessions, we're not getting as much out of each one. Our body builds a tolerance to training over time. And so eventually we will need to pull back and reset. I will talk about that in a little bit. But for now, let's talk about recovery, because training is not the only thing by itself that causes muscle growth. We need to actually then recover from the training. So we know the training needs to be productive. It needs to be hard. It needs to be effective. It needs to cause damage, which means immediately after a training session, we're not going to be stronger. We're actually going to be weaker because we're damaging our muscles in the gym. So what happens is we go home and we get a little bit weaker. And as time passes, we recover, we grow, we get stronger. And so if we look at this blue line as our baseline of fitness being defined as our ability to either display strength and power or our ability to recover, immediately following a workout, our fitness goes down. If you did a really hard chest workout one day, you got really sore, and the next day you try to do as many push-ups as you can, you probably wouldn't be able to do as many as you could on a really good day because your fitness has now dropped. But that's okay, because as time passes, assuming you're eating enough food and resting enough, you are going to recover and then get stronger than you were on the first day. And so that's what we do here. We work out. As time passes, we're immediately a little bit weaker. We recover back to baseline and continue recovering beyond baseline. Now, at this point, if we didn't have this next workout here, our fitness would start to go back down again. We need another stimulus to continue to push the envelope upward. So we have another workout, we get immediately weaker, time passes, we recover back to baseline, and we continue to recover beyond baseline. And then another, and then another, and then another. Now, like we talked about, each training session is now a little bit less stimulative than the one before it. So we have a few ways around this. We can increase the stimulus each training session by adding sets or by training a little bit closer to failure. But even so, eventually we are going to reach this red line up top, which is our maximum recoverable stimulus. So every human has this point, and it's different for everybody, where we are just not able to recover beyond this amount of damage, of fatigue that we induce. And so eventually we get to the point where we're so desensitized to training that we're not able to grow unless we do a little bit more, but that amount is more than we're able to recover from. So we might work out, we go below, we recover back up to here, and we're kind of basically right back where we started. Now, if we continued to try to push past this part and just brute force it, we would actually start to see our recovery go down. And so we'd see our fitness go down. This is kind of overtraining. You hear that term thrown around a lot, and it's pretty loosely defined. But basically, overtraining is training past a point where you're not able to productively recover and grow anymore. And so all you're doing now is damage, not fully recovering from that damage, so you're left weaker, then doing more damage, etc. We don't want to be there. So we have this issue where we can't train anymore to continue to grow. If we do keep training, we're probably not going to grow anymore. We might even get weaker. So what can we do? Let's bring it back to the caffeine example. If you need 8 cups of coffee to get you through the day, you know you probably have a problem, right? If you take a few days off, completely off of caffeine, one, you might get a bad headache. But for the most part, after those few days are over, you can go back to having 1 cup of coffee, and it's going to hit you just about as hard as that very first cup of coffee of your life hit you. So what we did was we resensitized to that stimulus. That minimum effective dose is now actually effective again. And with training, it's the same thing. So this is what we call a deload. These have been really popular in powerlifting and Olympic lifting circles for decades. And now they're finally starting to bridge over into more physique-related endeavors because the science is sound. And so what we do when we deload is essentially take time off of training. And we can do that in a few ways. We can still go to the gym and we can move a little bit of weight in a way that's not productive. So in a way that does not induce a lot of damage. And so that way we're able to still kind of do something, still keep practicing the movements that we like to use, but we're not inducing any damage. And so our bodies are able to recover from this big debt of recovery that we've accumulated up here. Or we could just take a few days off the gym entirely. There are a number of ways to navigate how you can go about a deload. And we do have some other videos on them you can check out. The point is, after a deload of anywhere from, say, 4 days to a week, depending on how you structure it, you should be completely resensitized to the stimulus that is training, meaning the minimum effective dose, the smallest amount that is technically productive, is going to work for you again. And so now you essentially get to start back down here, albeit moving bigger weights than you did last time around. Because let's face it, a week off of the gym or a week of not very hard lifting is not going to result in any muscle loss. So any muscle and strength that you gained over this period, you keep. So we start over and we go through the whole thing again. Eventually we get back to that point where it's time to deload. So we deload, we start over. This whole period can be called a mesocycle. Usually for most people, it's going to be anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks. Most people somewhere in between. For complete beginners, it may be even longer. But every person, if they train for long enough, train productively enough, eventually will run into this issue. So this is how we structure it. If you like this kind of content and would like to learn more about the nuances of training or just learn some new ways to exercise, check out our YouTube and subscribe.